A very visible clock. Thank you, Linda. Many thanks for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here, and quite an honor, I have to say, to be sandwiched between Senator Murkowski and Senator Wicker talking about seafood. My agency, NOAA Fisheries, is really responsible for meeting Congress's expectations for the production of safe, sustainable seafood in the United States. And I'm here to talk to you about that. But I have to acknowledge, really, Senator Murkowski's incredible vision and championing of Alaska seafood and seafood in general. We have some of the most productive and sustainable fisheries in the world. All of the federally managed fisheries are sustainably managed. We have been progressively moving up in the number of fisheries that are sustainably harvested, not subject to overfishing, not overfished. We have 44 now, progressively moved since 2010. And Alaska really represents just an unbelievable story. Of the $5.3 billion of seafood produced in the United States, all sources, 1.6 billion comes from Alaska. You think about the iconic Alaskan wild salmon, one of the best fish products, I think, generally, that you can consume. But there's also the highest volume fishery coming out of Alaska in the U.S. with the pollock fishery, halibut, crab. It's an incredible, people in Alaska are very closely associated with seafood, and it's a great pleasure for me to follow Senator Murkowski's comments. At the same time, we have a little bit of a production gap, as has been noted. And Senator Wicker, who you'll hear from in just a minute, has introduced some legislation that Senator Murkowski referenced that is visionary, in my view, and it's really designed to tackle not just our seafood trade deficit, but our seafood production challenge. Our agency, NOAA Fisheries, ultimately is responsible for meeting that challenge, and I want to talk to you about our ideas for how that's going to get done. But to start off, I'd like to ask you to think about what happens if you're wildly successful here. We have an incredible collection of talent in this room. We have nutritionists, scientists, seafood producers, suppliers, marketers. We have the culinary community. Imagine if all of you come together and really crack the code on connecting public health, individual well-being with seafood consumption. Imagine the Seafood Nutrition Partnership launching a new campaign, connecting with America's youth. Goes viral. Seafood consumption is the popular thing to do. Sardine consumption goes up. French fry consumption goes down. Ritalin, thing of the past, who talks about that stuff anymore. Campaign takes off. American consumption of seafood grows on a per capita basis. We get seafood consumption in American schools. Our youth are eating tons of seafood. They're getting really smart. They're getting politically active. Seafood Nutrition Partnership goes viral. And in 2024, you heard it here first. I snuck that in over lunch. Hey, this is America. Anything can happen. Yeah, I imagine half of Linda's cabinet is probably sitting in the room here. Yeah, imagine what we could do with HHS. And right, off we go. Meanwhile, as Scott well pointed out, this is what's going on in the rest of the world. So 2024, Linda's in the White House, and we are halfway towards a 2020 mid-century population of over 10 billion people. A lot of those folks are living in countries that already have very high seafood per capita consumption rates. As they go up the income curve, their consumption goes up with it. And domestic global demand, not just in the United States, global demand for seafood is going to go through the roof. It's trending that way already. And as others have pointed out during the course of the conversation here this morning, while we have very, very well-managed U.S. fisheries, and we are working very closely with our other national governments to improve the sustainability of wild capture fisheries around the world, there are not enough fish in the ocean. So the question we have to address is, where are those fish going to come from? Where is the seafood going to come from? It's not just fish, it's shellfish, it's seaweed, all kinds of products from the ocean. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that seafood production from wild capture fisheries has been flat for about 20 years. The increase in demand has been met through farm products, just not produced in the United States. And on a global basis, we are just now, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, we're just now moving past the halfway point with more than 50% of global seafood supplies coming from aquaculture products. And as others mentioned here this morning, in the United States, we import 90% of the fish we consume. Over half of that is farm product. A lot of people don't even know that. But as a producer, we're nowhere near 50-50. Of the fish that's produced, of the total seafood that's produced in the United States, 95% of it's wild. Just 5-6% is farmed. We have a very vibrant shellfish industry, and as I'll talk about in a minute, we've got a lot of potential for growth. But that's the challenge. There's some other challenges too in how people, what has happened with that aquaculture production and how that shapes how people think about it. So this is how a lot of the demand has been met. Scott showed you some nice pictures of aquaculture farms. And on a global basis and over time, there's been a lot of different ways people have tried. And on a large scale, this is what you see in some parts of the world. You will never see this in the United States. This is not sustainable seafood production. And as a matter of fact, a lot of countries that have done this happens to be a photograph from China. And I recently met with and spoke with some folks while I was in Europe about Chinese seafood production, and they're getting away from this. Their population realizes that it's not sustainable. It's creating adverse ecological effects. We could have predicted that. But that's not the vision of the future. That's the past. That's going away. And we need to talk about what sustainable seafood production looks like in the future, with aquaculture being a larger component of it. This is our vision of expanding seafood production. It's all forms, and it's done in ways that are sustainable. And you have images here of shellfish producers. This is all around the country. And even really interesting forms of finfish production that are taking place with cage culture like this in open ocean environments. I'm going to speak to that in a second when it comes to the new technologies and the ways that you can sustainably grow and harvest finfish as well as other forms of seafood. But we have a very vibrant industry in the United States. It's small, and we are really poised to grow. And our vision is making that possible. I'm going to tell you about how we're going to do that. First, we need to keep both pieces in mind for the demand that we have today and for this growth in demand that's going to come from the activism of the Seafood Nutrition Partnership and during Linda's presidency. We need to be producing all forms of seafood. We're going to continue. We are fully committed. Sustainability and wild capture fisheries production in the United States is a strong message, and it's our particular commitment. This gives you just a thumbnail sketch of the wild capture output in the United States. 5.3 billion, as I mentioned before, total product grown from around the United States. One of the remarkable things is just the diversity of our coastline and the incredible capabilities that we have in different regions. We also have a little bit, kind of a toehold in the aquaculture world. Aquaculture is really gaining momentum. But we are not producing at any kind of significant level. We have a total value in 2015 of $1.4 billion. It is dominantly coming out of the shellfish industry. Our production of finfish is, in terms of global market supply, fairly nominal. We were, when aquaculture really started getting going about 20 years ago, we were one of the most innovative nations around. We were one of the top aquaculture producers. But our story in aquaculture really is a story of opportunity lost for the most part. Incredible scientific and technological developments that mostly went abroad. A lot of the production that you see overseas is technology that came out of the United States. And we want to turn that around and see our science put to use for U.S. production. And this is really urgent. The global aquaculture industry is at a bit of an inflection point. That image is sort of worst-case image of really dense entire bays covered with net pens. The coastal environment has been subject to a lot of aquaculture development, and we're not going to see in a lot of countries much more opportunity for nearshore finfish production. The trend is towards offshore. The trend is really towards a combination of technologies of onshore systems, recirculating systems for hatcheries and for growing juveniles, and then very often growing them out in offshore markets. There's a lot of investment that other countries are putting into production systems in deep water. And this is where we think part of the future is going. It's not just finfish production. This image here is currently in operation in a pilot mode. Salmar, a Norwegian company, designed that, built in China. The Chinese have 4 or 5 of these in production that they're testing out as well. There's also an image here of mussel production that also is, like today, ready to go in federal waters. We just got to get the permitting issues covered. This is the future of aquaculture, and if we invest now in the right ways, the U.S. can get ahead of this curve and really start to push our production capability into new territory and really help us meet some of this shortfall in supply that we see around the world. So we're motivated. We're in the Department of Commerce. We're motivated by kind of the fundamental economics of this. We see the need, the really desperate need to diversify the coastal economy. This is part of the strategy for doing that. We're seeing, I think, an opportunity to really benefit not just from our existing wild capture industries, but also increasingly from farm capabilities. There's enormous enthusiasm and investment that's taking place around the country in aquaculture of all forms, including in Alaska with the Mariculture Initiative. There's incredible investment going into shellfish production in Alaska, to seaweed production, as well as in other parts of the country. And we're getting a lot of new science around how the environmental effects play out, the benefits of multi-trophic systems. It's new territory, and investment is starting to flow. The reason it is not flowing as dramatically as it needs to is because, as industry tells us, it's very, very difficult to get started. It's difficult to get started for 2 fundamental reasons. One is the regulatory environment is completely unpredictable. It's obscure. People don't know how to get a permit. It takes forever, and it costs way too much. You talk to people who are driving global investment decisions on where to put seafood production dollars. They don't come to the United States. It's going everywhere but here. And that's reason number 1. I've heard that time and time again. So what we're committed to doing 2 things to really turn this around. We are committed to dealing with that regulatory problem. And I want to emphasize, this is not about deregulation. It is about regulatory predictability. We have very, very high standards in this country to do anything in the water, in the coastal ocean environment. Those standards need to be maintained. They just need to be structured in a way that's accessible, sensible, and provides a kind of predictable regulatory pathway at known time, known cost, where people get a go, no-go decision on a permit. You won't see investment until you have that, and that's one of the commitments that the administration has and that we're implementing for the Department of Commerce. The other major commitment that we have is really centers around the science base for aquaculture production in the United States. And you got a good flavor here today of some of the investments that are happening around the country, not just in feeds, but in production systems, in a lot of the environmental monitoring and modeling work. We are conducting a lot of that, lowering the cost to industry, figuring out where aquaculture can be best situated, making sure there's not just the right physical and oceanographic kind of conditions, but also they're not conflicting uses. We have new production techniques, multi-trophic systems, lots of room to innovate. We need a stronger science base. So the second thing we're trying to do is pull together across all the federal government an R&D kind of game plan for building the science and technology infrastructure that industry needs to really lower the barrier to entry and increase the production in the end of the day. Our vision is that very much like the positive association of U.S. wild capture fisheries with sustainability, we want that vision to attach, that same reputation to attach to aquaculture product. We have in this room an incredible wealth of knowledge around the positive health benefits of seafood. You all can help build demand for seafood by getting that message out, strengthening the science, figuring out how to crack the code on public communications and changing behavior. It's about public health, it's about individual health, it's about individual well-being. It's also about environmental, sustainable, long-term environmentally sound production of protein. Growing fish is one of the most environmentally sound ways of producing protein in the world. And we've got to up our game. We've got to be there to do it. And it's also about economics. You put all those pieces together, to me, that's the trifecta. It's good for people, it's good for our communities, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the economy. We're committed to trying to build this out. I wish you every success in your work. It's a key part of the equation. The social acceptance around seafood generally and around aquaculture products in particular is not where it needs to be, and all of you are part of drawing that solution out and getting it going and getting Linda Cornish well on her way to the White House by 2024. Thank you.